Ganja, hemp, hanf, cannabis, weed, smoke, muggles, mez, tea, gauge, Michoacan, Maui Wowie, Acapulco Gold, Panama Red, Purple Haze, Skunk number 1, Northern Lights number 5, Williams Wonder, Chocolope, Super Silver Haze. In late September, Oregon and their Cannabis Control Commission decided to ban the use of particular terms when marketing cannabis strains to adults via retail. Their concern being that some of them might be mistaken for other drugs. Not that we have a legal LSD market or a legal green crack market, but those names have been wiped out. Or that they reference things that might be thought of as fun for children or appealing to kids, such as Grape Ape, which was a cartoon that went off the air in 1978. I remember watching it. I was 10. Which means that the person who was most likely to recognize Grape Ape for being a cartoon character is in their 40s or older. A lot of people are worried, and the funniest damn thing is that the codes that are going to be recognized by children, the adults won't recognize. And kids use different words than their parents do to describe things that they don't want their parents to know they're talking about. Duh. So what we did with regard to naming cannabis, we gave it a whole bunch of different names because it was under prohibition. But if you look at how these names changed over time, first it was ganja and cannabis, the broader hemp type of broader generic term for the plant. And then we start decarboxylating in the West. So we start taking tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, we loosen the carbon dioxide molecule from it, we render it into a psychoactive substance, THC, and that THC then is volatilized, turned into a vapor of a sort, inhaled, crosses through the lungs, the capillaries, crosses the blood-brain barrier, goes into the brain, the cannabinoids attach to their natural receptors in the brain, and you feel high. And once we started doing that, then we started going to muggles and mez and tea and reefer, particular references because you couldn't call it cannabis or hemp because the law was starting to crack down on those things. And then suddenly, in the 1960s, 30 years after Prohibition, there's this massive explosion of the wholesale retail global cannabis market. And global importers want to set their products apart from others, so they start identifying the regions, the nations, the cultures, the locations where their plants are coming from. Jamaican lamb's bread, right, is different than Durban poison, which is different than Thai stick. So these become means by which you identify strains. They become commonly known. They enter into the lexicon. You can find it in Cheech and Chong films. You can find it in comedy albums, National Lampoon, and other stuff that they talk about, 1970s into the 1980s. And then we get into the 1980s and the drug war, and all of a sudden the penalties for importing and the risks of importing become much greater. The problems with cultivating outdoors in the domestic United States becomes more difficult with flyovers that continue to this day, 30 years later. And so much of our cultivation for cannabis for the sake of producing psychoactive flower tops was moved indoors. And when you move it indoors, now you don't have what's known as the terroir. You don't have the locale. You don't have the land race, ecology, and climate that you would find in Panama or in Colombia. Instead, you have a grow room. In a grow room, well, the lights are set on timers, and the humidity is controlled, and the carbon dioxide level is controlled, and the nutrient drip is controlled, and everything, as much as possible, is under human control. So a grow room in New York City, and a grow room in Amsterdam, and a grow room in Los Angeles, and a grow room in Tokyo, and a grow room in wherever, Bali, will more or less produce similar growing conditions, and therefore the genetic trait of whatever that strain is will be expressed more or less uniformly. So that's when we see the name shift into more esoteric things like Williams Wonder and Northern Lights and Skunk and Kush and things like that. Now we've moved into another realm where we now have the commercialization and regulated market. The state is now stepping in saying what you may and may not call your product. That's part of regulation. It's part of bringing the market above board. And the state's concern, whether it's misplaced as this is or it's legitimate, the state's concern is real and they have the authority. So you will not be able to market green crack or Bruce Banner any longer or Grape Ape any longer in Oregon under the current rubric. You will be able to rename it. You can ask your bud tender, hey, you got any green crack? The bud tender will say, yeah, sure, we got some green. We got some of that right over here. It's GC. Right? Just call it the GC or call it Oregon Ape, because we can't call it Grape Ape on the receipt. We'll just call it Oregon Ape. Everybody knows what Oregon Ape is, just grape ape given the Oregon name, right? So that's where we're moving now. And of course, you have with the branding, Willie's Weed, Snoop's Weed, who else? All of them. Everybody who's going to have their own strain. Those strains are their own strains of cannabis that could have been called something like Hollywood Kush, but instead it's named as Snoop's, or it's named after Willie, or it's named after Melissa Etheridge, or somebody like that. And that's where we're going. We're going to see much more direct commercialization of product. These names that we've come to know and love over the past 25 or 30 years are still going to stick around in the lexicon, just like Reefer, just like Tea, just like Gauge, but they're not going to be as common. People are going to start to become more proprietary with the genetics, and you will see perhaps less appealing. Just simply, this is the seed company, and this is number 22. And that's what you get. You order number 22. Number 22 is an indica sativa hybrid that's got a high concentration of THC. It's got about a 0.2% CBD. It's got a nice pinene terpene profile with a lot of myrcene in it. That's what people are going to be buying in the future. The differentiation between high-grade cannabis is very small. Yes, there are connoisseurs, and connoisseurs will be able to tell the difference. Like with fine wine, they can tell the difference between a Malbec and a pick another Pinot, right? They can do it by scent, they can do it by appearance, they can do it by texture. Cannabis users, the advanced cannabis users can do that. Most cannabis users will not, just like most tobacco users, don't differentiate between, aside from the brand of the cigarette. Most beer drinkers don't really differentiate much besides the style of the beer. Most people who consume other products, organic agricultural products, don't really differentiate between this apple and that apple in any grave degree. It either gets you high or it doesn't. And that's the report. So check it out. We got a link going back to an article in the Oregon, what's it? The Oregon Cannabis, the Oregon Cannabis Connection. There's an article in the Oregon Cannabis Connection just published today. Go check the link, read it up, and maybe learn something. I'm the MDSA. Oh.